Hey gang, Josh here, and you're watching Chimp Skills. And today I'm here to inform you that you've been lied to. Your brain is broken. Not my brain, but your brain. Maybe my brain's broken too. I recently read a book by Professor Daniel Kahneman, and it was called Thinking Fast and Slow. So he's an experimental psychologist who has spent decades researching how we come about making decisions and some of the effects and biases that can also impede our decision making. So in the book, he talks about two different systems, which is a common sort of psychological phenomenon. That we have system one in the brain, which is our fast sort of, automatic, metaphorical, associative system. It's very rapid to make decisions and it can't be switched off. So this would be when you can detect, say, someone's voice, and if it's got a hostile tone to it. This is when you're driving your car on a road that you know, and you feel like you're on autopilot and you don't realize how you got home. It's also when I say 2 plus 2, that's system one kicking in. Now system two, on the other hand, is a lot slower and more deliberate and effortful, and it operates under a high energy sort of consumption. It requires a lot of attention. So system two, maybe for instance, if you were to be at the shopping center and you're trying to spot a car park and you look at the spot and you're like, oh, looks really tight, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to fit in, I might have to reverse in. And at this point, if we were to put a camera like zooming right into your eye, you would notice that as you go to maneuver your car into that tight parking space, your pupils would start to dilate. So as your pupils are dilating, this is letting us know, or letting the body know, that system two is starting to take effect. So system two is our analytical, higher order sort of thinking system. So say for instance, if I was to give you the sum of 17 times 24, it would take system two to figure that out. Now, system two, even though it is the analytical and more thoughtful sort of system, we think about that would be more us, and that system one is more automatic, and it's the one that can make errors and so on and so forth. So we may identify as being more of system two, that's more us. When in all fact that we're actually part system two, part system one. Because what happens with system two is it's lazy. So think of it like a sloth. It doesn't like to use a lot of energy. It doesn't like to expend itself too far. So if we make, say for instance, a lot of decisions. So if you've seen my earlier video on decision making, decision fatigue, I explained that the more decisions you're required to make throughout a day, the greater the toll it has on the brain, and then over time, basically the decision making performance starts to decrease. And we just start going back to sort of those automated sort of options and making sort of snap sort of harsh decisions. So the brain with system two, when it starts to get tired, it starts to take information from system one. And system one we can't switch off. So when we go to make an important decision using system two, sometimes we'll borrow a bit of information from system one. So these can be simple rules of thumb or other kinds of biases that we're not really aware of that are affecting our ability to make that decision. It's just sort of sneaking in there. Now don't get me wrong, system one serves a quality purpose. System one is what kept our ancestors alive. Say for instance, if they saw a predator, that would allow them to be able to react and either flee or hide. It keeps us alive because it detects changes in environment that could trigger a fear response that we can either evade or avoid something. So it does do a quality job. It sacrifices a bit of speed for quality. So it can get us into a little bit of trouble when we're making decisions, and like I mentioned, leave us vulnerable to certain effects and biases. So I'll go through a couple of these effects or biases that can affect the ability for us to make a decision. So these would be part of system one and how it can be affected. So the first one is called the sunk cost. So say for instance, if you were to go to a poker game and over the period of the night you lost $1,000. Now the smart person would, after they've lost $1,000, would get up from the table and walk away, because obviously they're not a very good poker player. But what naturally occurs is that people try to win their money back. Why? Because we've invested that $1,000, it's very hard for us to walk away and cut our losses. We somehow feel that our luck is going to turn around and we're going to get that $1,000 back. This is purely because we've invested that $1,000, makes it very difficult for us to walk away, and that sunk cost bias kicks in. I'll give you another example. If, say for instance, you were to buy, I don't know, a massive box of chocolates, you might buy a huge thing of Easter eggs or something like that. You may have spent $50. And anyway, it's a week after Easter and you're like, oh, I'm feeling really sick. I want to get on a diet and I want to start eating healthy again and I really want to start looking after my health. Even though it would be the best thing for you to throw away those chocolates, it's extremely hard because you invested that $50 into them. So you might hang on to them, you might eat them all before you start your diet, but our mind has that sort of bias or that fault where we don't want to let go of that previous investment. I'll give you one last example that you might be able to relate to. Think of, say, for instance, useless junk that you keep around your house. It might be a chair that always gets in the way when you're walking around. It might be an old pair of shoes, but you just can't bring yourself to throw it away. The main reason is that your brain is thinking about how much money you initially invested in that item, and that sunk cost bias kicks in and you can't let it go. So that's sunk cost, that's number one. Number two is anchoring. So this is the effect that, say for instance, if we were negotiating a salary. Now, if I was to throw out an initial figure of $80,000 to you, that is going to have an effect because it's the first piece of information that's thrown out. It's going to affect our sort of back and forth and the range that you may have been thinking for your own salary, just because that was the first figure that I have brought into the equation. So that always has an effect. Another example might be if you were, say for instance, to purchase a piece of art. You might have no idea how much that art is worth, but if I was to say, if you were to ask me how much it was and I say $2,000, that's then going to anchor your initial value of what that piece of art is, and you're going to start to negotiate down from that $2,000 figure. In all fact, that piece of art may only be worth $100, but because that's the first figure I've thrown out, it's anchored on you, and then you are then going to make your adjustments relative to that initial figure. So that's number two, anchoring. Number three is availability of information. So we've probably all had a discussion at some stage with someone who, say for instance, is a smoker, and you might talk about the science, and we're all fully aware that cigarettes are bad for you, and they're harmful to your health. But there'll always be that person who can talk about their great uncle or their grandpa or someone that they knew who lived to the age of 80 and smoked, multiple packs a day and was fine. So because that information is available to us and we've witnessed it, then it takes that bias and it starts to impede on our decisions where we're thinking, well, I can get away with that. Well, in all likelihood, the statistics of that person that survives all the way to the end of, with no complications from smoking would be extremely small. But because that information has been made available to us, it affects the decisions that we make. So that's number three, that's availability of information. Number four is confirmation bias. So this is when we have a particular sort of idea in our mind, and what we do is naturally find information that aligns with what we believe. So say for instance, if you've ever had a debate with someone around climate change, even though majority of science would agree that it's a real phenomenon, there'll always be a person that can bring up a study from here that the earth is warming and it's a natural occurrence or something like that, because we seek the information that aligns with our own beliefs. So that's confirmation bias. And last but not least, number five is outcome bias. So you probably had an experience with someone who said something similar along the lines of, when they go to the casino, they always bet on black, on the roulette table. I always bet on black because, I went here another time and I won like $800 when I bet on black. So in their mind, they're like, well, black is a good outcome, like I'm going to win money if I bet on black. When in all likelihood, with roulette, with black or red, it's 50-50 every time you go into that bet. But because there's been a previous outcome and someone's had a positive experience, they rely or they favor the black over the red more heavily. The same thing could be done if you were to toss a coin 10 times and we were going to have a bet on whether it be heads or tails. If I tossed the coin 10 times and 7 out of the 10 times it came up heads, you're probably more likely to go with heads over tails because of the previous outcome that you've witnessed, even though it's a 50-50 chance every time going into each bet. So look guys, that's just a few of those sort of effects or biases that may affect our decisions. There's multiple of them. I think there's between 20 and 30. So yeah, if you want to find out more, check them out. And you know, if you are making a decision and you can't quite justify why you've come to that outcome, it may be well worth looking into what bias may have affected your decision making, or if there was a rule of thumb or something that someone had told you that you'd adopted into your own sort of idea of the world that could have been sort of hindering your decision from making the best sort of, I guess, statistical outcome. So look guys, I hope you enjoyed the video today. Give it a like, give it a share, and until next time, peace.